her face lined not by age but by hunger. She carried in her arms a child, fragile, fevered, his breaths shallow as dying embers. His small hands clutched at her torn dress, as if clinging not only to his mother, but to life itself. Each step she took over the ruins was a defiance of fate, a silent rebellion against a world that had decided to erase them. The streets she crossed were littered with relics of a time that once called itself civilized. A rusted bicycle with wheels bent like broken wings, a child's doll half buried in ash, the skeletal remains of a piano whose keys had lost the memory of music. She paused by a shattered fountain where no water had sung for a decade. The stone angels carved around it stared with blind eyes, their wings chipped, their mouths open in a mute scream. Above, the wind carried a dirge, the rattling of loose iron, the whisper of ash falling like snow. Every sound was a ghost, every silence a grave. Yet even in this kingdom of desolation, the woman's gaze held a spark, small, flickering, yet unyielding. She bent her head to the child and whispered words too soft for the world to hear, promises of bread, of shelter, of a tomorrow not yet broken. And in that moment, as her figure vanished into the horizon of smoke, it seemed that the true miracle of the earth was not the birth of nations, nor the rise of machines, but the stubborn heartbeat of a mother who refused to let her child become another shadow in the dust. The woman and her child moved deeper into the ruins. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs like an animal that refused to rest. The boy's breathing had grown weaker, his lips pale, his body shivering in the cold wind. She pressed him closer to her chest, whispering, "Just a little longer, just a little more." Then, by chance or miracle, her eyes caught the faint glimmer of metal beneath a pile of rubble. She rushed forward, pushed aside the broken stones, and there it was, a can of food, dented but sealed. For a heartbeat, she felt the world stop. She smiled for the first time in months, her hands trembling as she picked it up. Salvation, just within reach. But salvation never came easily. Behind her, footsteps echoed. Harsh voices broke the silence. A gang of ragged men emerged from the shadows, their faces scarred, their eyes empty. They had seen the can, they had seen the child, and they wanted both. Fear shot through her veins. She clutched the boy and ran. Shouts filled the air, stones clattered under her feet. The can slipped from her hand, rolling back into the dirt as the men closed in. She didn't look back. Survival was worth more than food. She ran until her lungs burned, and the boy cried softly against her shoulder. When the voices finally faded, she collapsed behind the shell of a collapsed building. She had escaped, but the victory was hollow. They were safe, but still starving. Night fell. The ruins grew colder, the wind sharper. She needed shelter, or the child would not see the next dawn. In the distance, a broken staircase led down into the ground. A subway station, abandoned, dark, but intact. She carried the boy inside, step by step, down into the shadows. For a moment, it felt almost safe. The air was still, the walls thick, shielding them from the wind above. She found a corner, laid the boy down, and wrapped him in the scraps of her coat. For the first time that day, she let her eyes close. But safety was an illusion. The ground beneath them shuddered. A metallic groan echoed through the tunnels. Somewhere deep in the subway, water burst through cracked pipes, flooding the darkness with a roar. The stench of rust and rot filled the air. She jumped to her feet, clutching the child. The water rushed toward them, swallowing debris, sweeping rats and bones along in its current. Her heart pounded. There was no time to think. She ran through the tunnels, her footsteps splashing, the boy clinging to her neck. The flood chased her like a beast with open jaws. Her mind screamed at her to stop, but her body refused.
She climbed broken escalators, crawled over fallen beams, every breath filled with dust and panic. At last, gasping, she reached the surface. The tunnel spat her out into the night air, and she fell to her knees, soaked, shaking, clutching the child. The subway entrance behind her collapsed with a deafening crash, burying what little shelter it had promised.
Once again, hope had turned to dust. She lifted her head, looked at the endless ruins stretching before her, and realized the cruel truth. In this world, even safety was a trap. The night stretched on, endless and merciless. The woman carried her child through the ruins, her legs trembling, her breath ragged. Every shadow looked like an enemy, every sound a threat. She had nothing left, no food, no water, no shelter. Only the boy in her arms kept her moving forward. Then, in the distance, a miracle appeared, a light. It flickered faintly against the darkness, warm and golden, like a star fallen to earth. She froze, staring in disbelief. It wasn't fire, it wasn't lightning, it was a lantern. Her heart leapt. Could it be? Survivors? A camp? Perhaps people who had food, medicine, hope. She shook the boy gently. "Do you see it? We're not alone." His tired eyes opened, catching the glow, and for the first time in days, a smile touched his lips. Clutching him tighter, she pushed toward the light. Every step was a battle against exhaustion, but the promise of safety pulled her forward. The glow grew brighter as they approached, cutting through the smoke-filled air. Shapes emerged, tents, makeshift fires, shadows of people moving. She could almost hear voices, laughter, the clatter of pots. Tears welled in her eyes. She whispered, "We're saved." But the closer she came, the colder her hope grew. The voices were wrong, too sharp, too hungry. The shadows around the fire didn't move like families or weary survivors. They circled like wolves around prey. And then she saw them clearly. Men and women, their bodies gaunt, their clothes in tatters, their eyes shining with madness. Around the fire, bones were piled, human bones, cracked and blackened by flame. The smell hit her next, sickly sweet, undeniable. Cannibals! The lantern was no beacon of safety. It was bait, a trap to lure the desperate. Her body froze, but the boy shifted in her arms, his small voice calling out. Heads snapped toward them. The firelight caught their faces, grins spreading wide, teeth glistening. Panic surged through her veins. She turned to run, but it was too late. The pack was already moving. They broke into a sprint, their feet pounding the earth, their breath ragged with hunger. She stumbled over rubble, clutching the child so tightly he whimpered. The night exploded with screams behind her, voices chanting, laughing, calling. The fire's glow vanished as she fled into darkness, but the footsteps followed, closer and closer. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred. Still she ran. The boy's arms wrapped around her neck, his tears hot against her skin. She wanted to tell him it would be all right, but the words refused to form. Finally, she collapsed against a wall of broken concrete, pressing herself and the child into its shadow. She covered his mouth with trembling fingers, begging him with her eyes not to make a sound. The hunters passed by, their torches cutting through the night. Their laughter echoed, fading into the distance. For now, they were safe. But she knew the truth. The world wasn't only cruel, it was cunning. Every light in the dark could be a trap. Every hope could be a lie. She held the boy close and whispered, "I won't let them take you, not while I still breathe." The night gave her no mercy. Even after escaping the cannibals' fire, their laughter clung to the air like smoke, haunting her steps. The woman staggered through the ruins, the child heavy in her arms, her heart beating louder than the wind. She thought for a moment that they had shaken death away. She was wrong. A shadow detached itself from the darkness. A tall man, his eyes glinting, his mouth twisted in hunger. One of them had followed. He carried a jagged blade, more rust than metal, but sharp enough to end lives.
The woman froze, clutching the boy. The hunter stepped closer, savoring her fear. His voice was a rasp, low and cruel. "Leave the child, and maybe I'll let you crawl away." Her blood turned to ice. She knew he lied. They both would die here if she surrendered. With shaking hands, she set the boy behind her, shielding him with her body. For a heartbeat, she looked at her son, the only spark left in this ruined world, and something inside her hardened. The hunter lunged. She dodged barely, the blade slicing past her arm. Pain exploded, hot and blinding, but she didn't fall. She grabbed a broken pipe from the ground and swung with every ounce of her strength. Metal struck flesh. The man roared, staggering back. But he was stronger. He advanced again, his blade flashing. She blocked, struck, stumbled, her breath ragged. Each second was a war. Behind her, the boy cried out, his voice tearing through the night. The sound gave her fire. With one final scream, she drove the pipe into the man's chest. His eyes widened, his breath caught. He fell to the ground, choking, the blade clattering from his hand. The world fell silent, but for the woman's gasps and the boy's sobs. She collapsed beside her child, her arm bleeding, her body shaking. She pulled him close, pressing her forehead against his. "It's over," she whispered. "You're safe, you're safe." But even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't true. The wound on her arm throbbed, deep and dangerous. The city around them remained a graveyard. And far above, in the smoky sky, a new sound cut through the silence. Distant, mechanical, alien to the ruins. A helicopter. Its rotors thudded faintly, carrying across the ash-filled air. Then, as if carried by fate itself, a broken radio in the rubble crackled to life. A voice, weak but human, spoke through static. "Survivors, to the north, hope still lives." The woman lifted her head, eyes wide. Her son stared at her, hope flickering in his gaze. They were not alone. There was something left to fight for. And so, though her body ached and her blood stained the earth, she rose again. With the boy in her arms and the whisper of salvation in her ears, she stepped into the smoke-filled horizon. The fight for survival was not over. It had only just begun.